The Life and Acts of St. Patrick by Jocelin. Chapter 1. There was once a man named Calphurnius, the son of Potitus, a presbyter, by nation of Britain, living in the village Tabernia, that is, the field of the tents, for that the Roman army had there pitched their tents, near the town of Empthor, and his habitation was nigh unto the Irish Sea. This man married a French damsel named Conchessa, niece of the blessed Martin, Archbishop of Tours, and the damsel was elegant in her form and in her manners, for, having been brought from France with her elder sister into the northern parts of Britain, and there sold at the command of her father, Calphurnius, being pleased with her manners, charmed with her attentions, and attracted with her beauty, very much loved her, and, from the state of a serving maid in his household, raised her to be his companion in wedlock. And her sister, having been delivered unto another man, lived in the aforementioned town of Empthor. And Calphurnius and his wife were both just before God, walking without offense in the justifications of the Lord, and they were eminent in their birth, and in their faith, and in their hope, and in their religion. And though in their outward habit and abiding they seemed to serve under the yoke of Babylon, yet did they in their acts and in their conversation show themselves to be citizens of Jerusalem. Therefore, out of the earth of their flesh, being freed from the tares of sin and from the noxious weeds of vice by the plowshare of evangelic and apostolic learning, and being fruitful in the growth of all virtues, did they, as the best and richest fruit, bring forth a son, whom, when he had at the holy font put off the old man, they caused to be named Patricius, as being the future father and patron of many nations, of whom, even at his baptism, the God which is three in one was pleased, by the sign of a threefold miracle, to declare how pure a vessel of election should he prove, and how devoted a worshipper of the Holy Trinity. But after a little while, this happy birth being completed, they vowed themselves by mutual consent unto chastity, and with an holy end rested in the Lord. But Calphurnius first served God a long time in the deaconship, and at length closed his days in the priesthood. Chapter 2. How a fountain burst forth, and how sight and learning were given to the blind. A certain man named Gormaz, who had been blind even from his mother's womb, heard in a dream a voice commanding him that he should take the hand of the boy Patrick, then lately baptized, and make on the ground the sign of the cross, adding that at the touch a new fountain would burst forth, with the water whereof, if he bathed his eyes, he would forthwith receive his sight. And the blind man, instructed by the divine oracle, went to the little boy, made with his right hand on the ground the sign of salvation, and immediately did a new fountain burst forth. And his darkened eyes, being bathed with this healing stream, perceived the day poured in, and the virtue of Silo renewed, and, that the mercies of the Lord might be acknowledged, and the wonders that he doth for the children of men, while the outward blindness of Gormaz was enlightened, his inward sight received the revealing gift of science, and he who was before unlearned, having experienced the power of the Lord, read and understood the Scriptures, and as by the outward mercy from being blind he became able to see, so by the inward grace from unlearned he became learned. But the fountain flowing forward with a more abundant stream, even unto this day pouring forth its clear waters, sweet to the draught and wholesome to the taste, is honored with the name of St. Patrick, and, as is said, gives health or relief to many laboring with divers diseases, and it rises near the seaside, and over it the devotion of posterity has erected an oratory, with an altar built in the form of a cross. Chapter 3 of the Stone of St. Patrick. Near this place is a stone which the inhabitants call St. Patrick's Rock, for some believe that he was born thereon, and others that on it he celebrated Mass. As often as any controversy arises between the villages or the neighbors which is thought fit to be determined by an oath, it is brought to this stone, and there, the sacrament being taken, the cause is decided. But if any perjurer or false witness laid his hand thereon, immediately it was wont to pour forth water, and the holiness of Patrick openly showed unto all how accursed was the crime of perjury or of false testimony, yet at any other time it did not use to exude one drop, but always remained in its natural dryness. Which opinion of the people, however, as to this stone, is the more probable, we know not, though the latter may seem the nearer unto the truth. Let it suffice, therefore, to record the miracle which the Bishop St. Mel testifies that he had oftentimes beheld. Chapter 4. Of the well dried up. As he grew in age, he was seen also to grow in grace, and, as from the full store of divine ointment flowing within him, he perfumed all around with the abundance of his manifold miracles. And Patrick, the child of the Lord, was then nursed in the town of Empthor, in the house of his mother's sister, with his own sister Lupita. And it came to pass in the winter season, the ice being thawed, that a well overflowed and threatened to overturn many houses in the town, and the rising of the waters filled the mansion wherein Patrick abided, and overturned all the household stuff, and caused all the vessels to swim. And the little boy, being an hungered, asked in his infantine manner for bread, yet found he not any who would break bread for him, but jeeringly was he answered that he was nearer to being drowned than fed. When the boy dipped 3 of his fingers into the swelling water, and, standing on a dry place, he thrice sprinkled the water in the form of a cross, and in the name of the Holy Trinity commanded the well that forthwith it should subside. And behold a miracle! Immediately all the flood retired with a refluent course, and the dryness returned, nor was there hurt or damage seen in the vessels or in the furniture of his dwelling. And they who looked on saw that sparks of fire instead of drops of water were sprinkled from the fingers of the Holy Child, and that the waters were licked up and absorbed thereby. And the Lord, who collects the waters as in a heap, and lays up the depths in his treasury, who had worked such great works through his beloved child Patrick, is praised of all, and the child also is magnified who was so powerful in him, great and worthy of all praise. Chapter 5 How he produced fire from ice. Though St. Patrick, in his childish years, sometimes thought as a child and acted as a child, yet do his illustrious works declare how precious was he in the eyes of him who was for us born a child. And on a certain day, the winter then freezing everything, the boy Patrick, being engaged in the sports with boys of his own age, gathered many pieces of ice in his bosom, and bore them home, and cast them down in the courtyard. But his nurse, seeing this, said to him that it were better he had collected wood for the hearth than have played with pieces of ice. And the boy, speaking with the tongue of an aged man, answered unto her, It is easy for the Lord, who created all things, even from these to supply the hearth, and at his nod, so that faith be not wanting, it is easy for fire to prevail over water, and that thou mayest know, said he, how possible are all things to them who believe. Thy faith shall be an eye witness of that which I say unto thee. And he heaped together the pieces of ice, like brands for the fire, and he prayed, and, making the sign of the cross, he breathed on them, and immediately fire went forth, and, lighting the ice, produced long streams of flame. Yet not only did the hearth give warmth to all who came near, but it ministered much cause of admiration, for out of the mouth of the boy Patrick was seen to issue flame instead of breath, that he might plainly appear to be illuminated within by the infinite light of the divine grace. Nor does this miracle much fall short of that ancient miracle which the Scripture records to have been performed by Nehemiah, for when he brought back into the land of Judah the people of the Hebrews after their long captivity, restored to freedom by Cyrus, the king of Persia, he commanded the place to be searched out wherein their fathers had hidden the fire of the sacrifice, in which, when discovered, the fire was not found, but thick water, the which Nehemiah commanded to be brought, and the sacrifice to be sprinkled therewith, and immediately a great fire was kindled, and it consumed the holocaust and burned the hard stones. So was the congealed water burned up by the power of the same fire which, proceeding from water, did burn to ashes the sacrifice and the stones of the altar. Therefore is the strangeness of this miracle to be admired, the holiness of Patrick to be venerated, and in all these things the power of the omnipotent God to be adored, and herein by a most evident sign did the Lord illustrate Saint Patrick, whose preaching afterward inflamed many that had been frozen in unbelief with the fire of faith and of the charity of God. Chapter 6. How the sister of Saint Patrick was healed. On a certain day the sister of Saint Patrick, the aforementioned Lupita, being then of good stature, had run about the field, at the command of her aunt, to separate the lambs from the ewes, for it was then weaning time, when her foot slipped, and she fell down and smote her head against a sharp flint, and her forehead was struck with a grievous wound, and she lay even as dead, and many of the household ran up, and her kindred and her friends gathered together to comfort the maiden wounded and afflicted, and her brother came with the rest, compassionating his sister, but confiding in the divine medicine, for, drawing near, he raised her, and, touching with his spittle the thumb of his right hand, he imprinted on her forehead, stained with blood, the sign of the cross, and forthwith he healed her. Yet the scar of the wound remained as a sign, I think, of the miracle that was performed, and a proof of the holiness of him who, by his faith in the cross of Christ, had done this thing. Chapter 7. How he restored to life his foster father. The husband of St. Patrick's nurse, who had oftentimes borne him an infant in his arms, being seized with a sudden death, expired. And his wife, with many others of the household, ran thither, and to Patrick, who was standing nigh, bursting into tears, she thus spake, Behold, O Patrick! Thy foster father, the bearer of thine infancy, lieth dead, show now, therefore, on him thine enlivening virtue, even that which hath been wont to heal others. And the boy of holy disposition, compassionating the tears of his nurse and the miserable state of his foster father, approached him lying there lifeless, and he prayed over him and blessed him, and signed him on his head and on his breast with the sign of life, and he embraced him, and raised him up, and restored him unto her alive and safe. And all who beheld this miracle gave praise to God, who worked such works in Patrick. Chapter 8, of the sheep released from the wolf. While St. Patrick was a little boy, his aunt entrusted him with the care of the sheep, and to these he diligently attended with his aforementioned sister. For in that age no reproach was attached to such employments when the sons of the chief men discharged the duties of a shepherd, as the patriarch Jacob and his sons truly declared before Pharaoh, that they, like their forefathers, were keepers of sheep, and as the lawgiver Moses and the illustrious King David long time labored in the shepherd's occupation. But as the boy Patrick was one day in the fields with his flock, a wolf, rushing from the neighboring wood, caught up a ewe lamb, and carried it away. Returning home at evening from the fold, his aunt chided the boy for negligence or for sloth, yet he, though blushing at the reproof, patiently bore all her anger, and poured forth his prayers for the restoration of the ewe lamb. In the next morning, when he brought the flock to the pasture, the wolf ran up, carrying the lamb in his mouth, laid it at Patrick's feet, and instantly returned to the wood. And the boy gave thanks to the Lord, who, as he preserved Daniel from the hungry lions, so now for his comfort had saved his lamb uninjured from the jaws of the wolf. Chapter 9, of the cow freed from an evil spirit, and 5 other cows restored to health. The aunt who had nursed St. Patrick had many cows, one of which was tormented with an evil spirit, and immediately the cow became mad, and tore with her feet, and butted with her horns, and wounded 5 other cows, and dispersed the rest of the herd. And the owners of the herd lamented the mishap, and the cattle fled from her fury as from the face of a lion. But the boy Patrick, being armed with faith, went forward, and, making the sign of the cross, freed the cow from the vexation of the evil spirit. Then drawing near to the wounded and prostrate cows, having first prayed, he blessed them and restored them all even to the former health. And the cow, being released from the evil spirit, well knowing her deliverer, approached with bended head, licking the feet and the hands of the boy, and turned every beholder to the praise of God and the veneration of Patrick. Chapter 10, of the water turned into honey, and of his nurse restored to health. The nurse of St. Patrick, being oppressed with illness, longed much for honey, by the taste whereof she trusted that her health might be restored. It was sought by all who stood round her, but obtained not, and when she was told thereof, she longed so much the more earnestly for that which she could not have, and complained that she was remembered and assisted of none. But her young charge, the illustrious boy Patrick, was grieved for her, and, putting his trust in the Lord, he commanded that a vessel might be filled with fresh water from the fountain, and brought unto him, and he bended his knees in prayer, and, rising, blessed it with the sign of the cross, and gave it to the woman desiring honey. And immediately the water was changed into the best honey, and the woman tasted, and her soul was satisfied, and she was relieved from her infirmity. Thus did Patrick change water into honey in the name of him who, at Cana in Galilee, changed water into wine.